We're just checking to make sure that we have people on the phone still with us.
Lacey Bruman's on the phone.
Great, I'm glad you can hear us, thank you. I think we're ready to rock and roll. And this room is cooperating better than it did last week, so that's making me feel happy. Good morning, everyone. We're almost to the weekend, which is nice. And I feel like we were just together a minute ago. So I hope everyone had a nice long weekend in the meantime. We can kind of jump in with just some quick introductions. I feel like this group is getting to know each other, but I think it's always helpful just to go around the room and say hello and warm up the room a little bit with some introductions. Sue, do you mind starting? Oh yeah, and if you can make you can punch it to green, and then it's this one. There you go.
Good morning, I'm Sue Coffey. I'm a parent and I'm a facilitator for AFSP.
Hello, I'm Brenda Pace from the Public County Attorney's Office, and I do the mental health proceedings there.
Hi, I'm Carly Salon with Mental Health Center Denver's Crisis Intervention Response Unit.
I'm Jessica Russell. I'm the Director of Crestone Recovery Services at Health Solutions in Pueblo.
Good morning, Summer Gathercole, Senior Advisor for Behavioral Health Task Force.
Peggy Heil, Department of Public Safety.
Good morning, Tim Lane with the Colorado District Attorney's Council.
Hi, Allison Butler from Disability Law Colorado, co-chair.
Ben Harris with the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing.
Mary Thomas with, oh, I'm not with anything. I have lived experience.
Corey Robinson Rosenberg, CU School of Medicine.
Lucy Ohanian, Colorado State Public Defender.
Alexis Geis, Colorado Access.
Robert Roythwine, Office of Behavioral Health, CDHS.
All right, and let's move to Zoom. I'm just going to run the order I have your name tent sitting in, and we'll see who else may have joined. Judge Seamus. You may need to unmute yourself either through Zoom or *6 on your phone. Okay. Raina.
Raina Shaner, lived experience.
Dr. I.
Sasha Rai, Director of Mental Services.
Joy. Joy, we may have you muted.
Joy Hart, Colorado Department of Corrections, Chief of Behavioral Health.
Good morning. And Laura.
Hi, Laura Warner, San Juan Basin Public Health.
Do we have any other members of the subcommittee on the phone or on Zoom?
Hi, this is Moses Greer from the Colorado Behavioral Healthcare Council.
Good morning, Moses.
Lacey Bruman, Track Tech.
Hi, Lacey.
Good morning, Derek Harvey with the Canyon City Police Department and Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police.
We have quite a crew on the phone today, so thank you all for joining us. I'm glad that that we're hearing you. If you can please just remember to mute yourselves when you're not participating on the phone. If we hear background noise, we'll remind you. If you are on the phone, the mute and unmute for Zoom is *6. We're not going to have any small group work today. We are going to have some discussion in the room, so I encourage you to use the chat feature. Emma is going to be monitoring, or you can raise your hand to her virtually, or just kind of scream into the room, and we'll make sure we catch you. We're not going to do approval of minutes. Go ahead.
Before we get into the housekeeping,
yeah.
We asked Tim to join the group. Tim, you want to talk about what group you're a part of a little bit, what organization?
Okay, yeah, sure. My name is Tim Lane. Some of you know me, and a lot of you I've been involved in other programs before.
Hey, Tim, you just used your, thanks.
And you would think because I'm in a bunch of groups like this, I'd remember the microphone thing, but no, of course not. I rely on my voice carrying well because it does. I am with the Colorado District Attorney's Council. Colorado District Attorney's Council is not affiliated with a single DA's office. We actually represent all 22 elected district attorneys throughout the state and do a lot of training and policy work on behalf of all 22 elected district attorneys. So that is my organization that I'm involved in. I am also on the legislative task force for treatment of those with mental illness in the criminal and juvenile justice system. Been on John Hickenlooper's task force of a similar nature to this one, and a variety of other groups and organizations related to mental health. So this is one of my specialties in the area of policy reform for criminal justice at CDAC. We have several members in our office, but this is one of my specialties.
And I bring that up just because yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I bring that up because Juan, while he's a DA, wanted to be clear that that he's not representing the Denver DA when he's in this committee. He's representing as a chair, as on the board of Mental Health Colorado. And we really needed to have someone here that doesn't represent a DA per se, but was going to talk from the voice of a district attorney's lens. The sort of, because we found with these committees, the worst thing you do is if you're missing a PD or a DA and it comes time to do legislation, you take a bunch of steps backwards. So. And then I always encourage cage matches between the PDs and the DAs in all our committee meetings. So, thanks. That's all.
So because we had such a rapid turnaround between our last two meetings, the meeting minutes have not been posted from Friday. So those will be coming, and we'll approve both those and these at our next meeting. And really today, our focus is on Intercept 4. I know that you've all seen the survey that came out to you related to the revised recommendations in Intercept 3. So we'll revisit those next time as well. And you can expect kind of that process to repeat. And when we get to the end of the meeting, we can talk about how that's been working and how, if there's any kind of just revision to the process of the survey that you would like to suggest, because you're going to be getting a lot of them over the next couple of months. But before we dive into that, we had, Summer was able to connect with Mary a little bit between meetings, and Mary wanted a little time to talk about her experience. And Summer, I don't know if you want to set that up at all.
So I think everybody knows that we are starting to host kind of public testimonies once a month, where we're asking family members and people with lived experience to share their story and give us some recommendations and thoughts. We had our first one last week. As you can imagine, it was hard to hear some of the stories and really heartbreaking, and also motivates us to say we got to figure out how to get a system that works for everybody, right? So Mary was actually there for that testimony and sat in and heard all of that, and then reached out and said, hey, could I share my story with the long-term competency committee? So wanted to give her this opportunity to do that, and also to encourage all of you, to the degree that you can, either listen in or come to the powerful, and it's just a good reminder of why we're sitting around the table doing the hard work that we're doing.
Okay, this is my story. The following are suggestions that I've been able to come up with that would have benefited my 19-year-old self during my first and last encounter with the criminal justice system. First of all, the police were called to my house to do a welfare check. I was not violent or aggressive, and there were no weapons in the house. I was hallucinating, and I was upset and afraid. The officers that came to the house were not trained in mental health, nor were they a part of the CIT. That's the first thing that could have changed the outcome of the night if the officers had been part of the CIT training. They arrested me for felony assault on a police officer because I wanted to make sure they were real, and I had touched one officer to convince myself. At that point, I still didn't know what was real or not. The best outcome would have been if they had taken me to the hospital because I needed medication. I think that if there had been a secure treatment center as an option, that would have been immensely better than jail. The problem with the officers arresting me was that I was now in the court system. When I appeared in court, there was so much ignorance surrounding mental illness. Both the prosecutor and the judge laughed when I told them I had a severe mental illness because I was a student at CU at the time and not on academic probation. This is where prosecutorial discretion would have helped immensely because the best outcome would have been for the prosecutor to dismiss the charges against me. This is the second point where I think changing the law would be beneficial because I should not have been charged with a Class 3 felony. It was much too severe for what actually happened. In the end, I was forced to plead guilty when in fact I really did nothing wrong other than touching the officer once when I was hallucinating. I know from my own experience how frustrating it is when the people who you interact with along the way know nothing about mental illness. Also, the fact that I had to plead guilty because I was having a psychotic episode was wrong too. The judge and prosecutor punished me essentially because I was sick. So I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's important. And then I think on the next agenda, Mental Health Colorado is going to come and talk about defelonizing, their recommendation for defelonizing certain types of assaults for people who are, if it's a part of their presenting symptom or I don't know what exact wording they're using, a behavior tied to their current mental health illness and what that means. And we'll talk a little bit today about, we do have a number of people in the hospital for spitting on officers and who get Class 4 felonies, and that's not uncommon. And as you heard in the story, that it's not always a controllable behavior. Sometimes what's going on when someone's having a psychotic episode, and is locking someone up really the answer? So we'll hear from Mental Health Colorado next week, and I want to be clear that we'll talk about both sides. So, we always take safety into consideration, but it is getting spit on a shirt really a safety issue versus others? I'm thinking about my own staff at the hospital who get spit in the eye, and it's a whole different scenario where they have to go to the hospital to get, they have to, they're worried about diseases and things like that. So we will talk about that in this group when Mental Health Colorado comes. One of the future meetings, I think next meeting, we'll talk about defelonizing felony behaviors. Sorry.
The other item, Allison, that didn't get a slide today was we had discussed on our debriefing call just some things that were coming up that you wanted to clarify with the subcommittee. I'm going to bring you this mic. These work, but for extended talking.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to address, I've been getting some feedback about sort of what is the role of the group. Is this just a CDHS show that we're putting a rubber stamp on, or if we have input that is not in alignment with what CDHS has recommended, that it won't matter? And I definitely want to say that that is not my understanding of what's happening. CDHS, because of the lawsuit, did have to come up with a plan, and that plan doesn't have to be finalized until January. And so it dovetailed very well with what Governor Polis has envisioned of let's have stakeholders at the table to help decide how the state should be carrying out its obligations in relation to competency matters. So while we are working from a plan, and while CDHS is going to ultimately be presenting a plan, the whole point is to have us have input. And if there are things that the group does not agree with, or that even a few members of the group strongly object to, that will be sent to the governor along with CDHS's proposed plan. And as Disability Law Colorado is part of the lawsuit, when they present the plan to the court as part of what they need to do in following up to the lawsuit, I will be aware of, yes, you presented this plan as your plan, but we know that there were stakeholders that had these major concerns, and this is what, so we think this is a problem. So there are several checks and balances. Ultimately, this is CDHS's responsibility, but we do need to be, I just want people to be feel free to speak up with their opinions now, because they are going to matter for the report, and they are going to matter for the lawsuit, and they are going to matter for the whole plan for the state.
So I just wanted to ask, this is Summer, for those of you on the phone, I just wanted to ask a quick question. I will apologize in advance because I have not talked to you or Robert about this. But, you know, with the other subcommittees, there's a little bit more flexibility because there's not the January deadline and the federal report constraint. So I'm actually wondering, like, would committee members feel more comfortable saying, like, let's take 2 half days and like plow through the plan and the recommendations and have some conversations, and then step back and say, like, okay, now that we've, you know, figured, like, check the box with the plan, do we want to get into more of like looking at the overall system?
I mean, for me, this is a huge part of my work, a huge part of my organization's work. So absolutely, I would be open to doing that. We want the input. You know, we do represent people in the state of Colorado with disabilities, but we are one organization with just a few voices, so we need these voices. So I would be totally on board.
And I support that concept too, because I think for me the plan is only one part of this committee, and it's an important part of the committee. But I think for me, what I'm looking for from the department, and feel free to say things that you like in the plan too for federal court, but it is limited to the department and what's in the department's scope. And this problem is so much bigger in the department, and we've been beating that drum for a while. We have a lot of accountability and responsibility we need to live up to. But this is a systemic issue, and the plan really is about the department. So I'm eager too to when we finish the plan to get to what about the rest of the system to make it, honestly, to a certain degree, more doable for the department to live up to what it's accountable for. And you'll see today, we just keep getting more and more referrals. A lot of people cycling back, multiple people. So the system, not just department, but the system is failing the process. So I'm eager to get to that. So if time allows, I would like for this group, because I really want to hear the innovative parts of what this group has to offer, not only to what they think the department should do, but also what the system needs to look like. And we have to get through the plan first, because we're on a deadline. So I'm open to that. And maybe if maybe we'll do a show of hands, if people are open to maybe having, if we go through 2 days, 2 half days to go through the entire plan. Like right now we have planned to go through different intercepts, which is a much slower process than let's just go through the plan. And then let's talk about the larger system. Show of hands if we can make it work time-wise. Who's interested in sort of getting the plan done in 2 half days?
Oh, wow. Awesome.
Okay. So there's a and I know time's going to be an issue, so we're going to have to plan this out in advance. So it's not going to be like 2 weeks from now. But it'd be great. So I think we have support there. I think from show of hands.
Have support from Zoom participants as well.
Great, from online.
And Lucy did have a comment she wanted to make from the beginning. So maybe.
I just wanted to know when, in terms of timeline, that you need to present to the governor. Because I understand that has to happen before anything is presented to the court. Are we talking December? Like,
for this committee, the federal courts actually, don't tell the governor I said this, more important than the governor in this scenario. We need to get to the plan. I'll brief the governor as part of just the regular job. My boss and I will brief the governor on the plan before January 2020. But I think the overall plan we have till June, like the other committees. He would like to see something by the end of the fiscal year. Mainly because we start the budget process for the year after in like May, June. So I think we have for the system-wide, I would say June. For the plan, we have to do the federal court. So there's sort of 2 bosses here that we're meeting the needs of.
And Ben did too. Have a question.
This is Ben from Healthcare Policy and Financing. Yeah, I affirm this approach as well. I think it's incumbent upon us, just as members of this subcommittee, to really recognize and check our feedback relative to what is pertinent now versus what is more of a long-term conversation that we need to have after this plan. Just because I look behind me and I see one over there, I don't think it's an easy way to check ourselves on that. I think we need to start utilizing the parking lot more, just to flag ourselves to say, you know, this is a good idea, but let's talk about this in January after we submit that plan. that being said, I do maybe want to get clarification that are you two open, is the department open to actually receiving genuine revisions to the plan? Because I think in just talking with other people and myself, I think I do have some elements that could be reworked that are very plan specific that, you know, if we go through these intensive days, is that still on the table to say, you know, can you either word this differently or can you add this component to it? Or I just think that this is, you know, missing in terms of cohesion. So I think there's still that concern or that ask.
Yeah, we're absolutely open. I mean, I'm not here to waste people's time with a show. So if you have feedback on the plan, we're open to it. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to happen, right? It means we need to discuss it as a group about what the recommendation is. I'm absolutely open to what that is. Yeah.
And I definitely would hope so, yes. Good. So it seems like we would have to follow up on that, see if we can find time that works for our facilitators as well as the group. And I mean, I think it's a great idea. I think we start getting going on really good things and then we stop and then we have to go on to the next thing because of our timeline. So if we can set aside some time to go through it all, I think that would be really beneficial.
I would vote 2 half days. I think 1 day sounds super intense, and I think our capacity to offer feedback is going to plummet. After lunch. So I would say morning would probably be better.
And I think that gives people time to get maybe feedback from their organization too about things that are coming up, and I think that would be appropriate.
Intercept 4, I'll give you this mic. Robert, and he has a list of people who I've reached out to in the last couple of days to help kind of support what's going on the ground. So Jessica and Moses,
Carly?
Either of those is great. Just so that you're aware, some of you are on the phone that Robert
Yeah, when we get to the community restoration part, the folks that are actually doing the community restoration, feel free to jump in and I'll take a pause there. So I'm going to try to go through these somewhat quickly because there are 17 things in the plan that ask the committee to consider and weigh in on. And I know that we ran out of time last time. Again, we're doing the Intercept model. Intercept just meaning at what point does the individual make contact with the system through competency, everything from community services, law enforcement, court, evaluations, which we discussed last time, the actual restoration treatment, which is what we're discussing today, being discharged and back to community services. There are 3 key components of the Intercept 4 restoration treatment is the community, inpatient, and other resources. Other resources being the Bridges program, which are embedded in the court system. They're for all individuals with mental health in the court, and they're supposed to help the court sort of advise, be there for sort of a subject matter expert, do some follow-up. And then the forensic support team is the navigators that were created last year to build, and that's the department's folks who are supposed to be contacted the Bridges program. So if you think about all the things the department does, and you have individual in court, and there's all these different parties involved, basically the Bridges is supposed to coordinate everything on the court side. The forensic navigator is supposed to coordinate everything on the department side, so we have one contact with one contact, and we can streamline information better and coordinate better in the care of the individuals who've been court ordered for restoration. Yeah.
the other like the wellness courts and
Yeah.
are those kind of included in this Intercept?
Can we parking lot that too when we go over Intercept 2, which is the court process? Because there is variability about problem. The question was about problem solving court, and there's some districts have mental health courts, some districts have wellness courts. Denver is putting together a court that is specifically looking at frequent flyers, people who come back to the system multiple times, and I know Carly's working with them on the service side of that. So we can come back to that, and maybe Carly, when we come to that, you can talk a little bit about what you're doing in Denver. Great. At any point anybody wants to present on programs that they're familiar with, please let us know, and we'll make time. Inpatient competency restoration, you can see that list is just growing year after year, and it has not stopped. And when we get into our meeting and talking about the larger systemic issues, I think this needs to be a key question of, are we overburdening this system because we're under delivering in another system or another angle of the system? So this has gone up. Now this is true nationally. This is not just Colorado. Now we're moving up at a higher rate than most states, but this is true nationally. We're seeing sort of an increase in competency referrals in states throughout the nation. There are a lot of theories. I know in 2000, I think it was 2001, there was a federal case that basically lowered the bar. I might have the year wrong. Maybe Allison knows, but there was a federal judgment that basically changed the burden of requirement. So it gave the benefit of the doubt that people with mental health, that might have mental health that interfere with the court process. And I don't know the exact trial, but I do know that early on, and I do believe it was early 2000, that the federal court basically ruled that no, you have to go through the process for people in which competency is raised. You can't dismiss the concern that's raised in court. And that sort of changed the bar a little bit. And I think that's one of the reasons why, at least according to Dr. Fox, who I respect a lot on this topic, has said that probably influenced nationally some of the changes and gave more due process rights to individuals who have mental health concerns. Inpatient competency restoration referrals. This is for the last year. Want to kind of show what it looks like within the year. It's a little spiky month to month, but ultimately it's an increase. It continues to increase. August we had we went up as for evaluations. We went the highest ever with last month at 144. Competency evaluations, which will impact the number of restorations the month after. So in September, our numbers of restorations will go up because we're not seeing a big fluctuation in the percentage of people found competent or incompetent based on referrals. The red line there is the number of individuals versus the number of referrals. Some individuals have multiple referrals, so they have multiple charges. So this is data that we track weekly. Every Friday morning, my team and when we update my bosses on where we're at. So as you remember in previous, there's tier 1, tier 2. So you get evaluated. If an individual meets the level for, basically, I'm just going to sum it up as who's so sick that they need to be in the hospital really quick. That's tier 1. Folks that who are court ordered for inpatient but don't meet that, they're so sick they need to go to hospital right away, are tier 2. So those are the 2 tiers. So tier 1, we've been pretty successful in getting people in. Now you can see that there's 3 categories here. We did miss one in July, early July, that was a female. So we have been working on, all of a sudden this year we saw a spike in female referrals, which is not typical. So we had to make some adjustments to our female units and beds available for females at the hospital in order to get them admitted. Those are the individuals waiting the longest on the list, but we did transfer 1 unit from a male unit to a female unit over the last 30 days or so. So we're hoping that helps. But you'll see here, so the red means that we missed the 7-day. And that's and not that the money matters, it's just more about getting people in time, but that is a $500 a day fine for the department. And then the green means we got them within 7 days. And there's this big blue group. So the blue group, most of those, and we looked into this, didn't even make the wait list because they were admitted before, either the day of, so they were either admitted the day of or before the court order.
So before the court orders, if they met 2765, which means they're so sick that we could court orders, like a physician's allowed to admit someone against their will because they're so sick. So we're able to get those people in. So we transfer from the jail to the hospital without waiting to get to court. There are others who don't meet that criteria, but who are sick enough under the definition of tier 1 that the day the court order comes through, we admit them that day. So they're not even hitting the wait list. And then there's a third group of inpatient evals. And the law now allows us to hold on to those folks instead of sending them back to jail and then sending them back to us. So. Questions, raise your hands. You got questions? I know it's a lot of technical stuff. What's that?
I'll share that my experience is that at least for August, that graph is not reflecting what I know about clients of ours who are designated tier 1 and are 3 weeks into their wait.
I think the challenge is there are people in the blue group that are tier 1, but they have to wait for court. We had an individual yesterday that we were told they're not going to court till the 28th. We can't admit them if they're not 2765 prior to that court order.
I guess we should talk offline because the two I'm thinking of, I have court orders.
For restoration?
Yes.
Okay, we can follow up. They're tier 1, the evaluators determined tier 1 and they've not been admitted. It's not coming up on our radar, so if you can give me those names, I'll follow up. And then this is tier 2.
One thing, sorry. Yeah. I just did want to mention what the part that you were talking about. So I'm hoping that we can sort of get a rough timeline about the restoration process, because while we do have some good numbers in here, those numbers often wait on other things. And when I learned a couple of meetings ago that it can take a long time to even raise competency, so it's not as if people are getting evaluated within 7 days of their arrest. They're getting evaluated within 7 days of it being brought up in court. And it sounds like there's this, or not sounds like, I know there is also this other issue of once they're determined tier 1, they need to get into court in order to officially be there. So I guess what I'm telling the committee is to look at these timeframes, but understand it's not from day 1 being they get arrested to, these specific timeframes. It's always involves the court as well.
Yeah, it's not the consumer experience. The consumer experience is often they've already been in jail for a while because of what Allison brought up, and it's not formally been presented in court. Some people it doesn't come up in their first court hearing related to their criminal charges. So some of these folks, and I often spend a lot of time. I hear these stories like somebody's been waiting a year, and then what we find is that they've been pushed around the system for a year. While there may be a couple months in our end, that's our fault. There's a larger systemic process in which they're being held in jail. So there's a question over there.
Yeah, so this is Derek. I just had a question about the tier 1 stats that you had. You had talked a little bit about multiple referrals about the same individual. How are those handled? So are they consolidated on a single referral, or do you have to wait for that court date for the next referral to come in?
That's a good question. I think they're, Catherine, do you know if they're consolidated?
I think it depends on court. Many times the cases are consolidated even in court, but not always.
Okay, so the answer was that many times it's up to the court, and many times for the folks on the phone, if there's multiple orders, many times the courts will consolidate, particularly if it's the same court or same judge, and then sometimes not always, and that may happen more if there's 2 different judges or two different courts as well. So, and then sometimes they're in the middle of evaluation and they pick up another charge and then they have to be evaluated again.
And that, I guess that's kind of why I'm asking, if they're awaiting trial in a different location, or they're being, let's say they get arrested in Fremont County, but they're actually being housed in Custer or Pueblo for additional offenses, there may not be communication between those 2 different courts that's actually making it to you to be able to consolidate those, and there might be jurisdictional issues there too. But I also think that's an area for Intercept where we can lower some of those numbers looking at unique individuals as opposed to simply referrals.
Yeah, and that is a challenge, right? If you get multiple evals. Now, we have to go with whatever the first time that we're court ordered for restoration. That's when the clock starts for us for that first order for that individual. But you do run into these scenarios where it gets a little tricky when you have multiple evals multiple scenarios. It gets even trickier when you have one charge, somebody's found competent, the other charge, the other person's found incompetent. And that's happened from time to time. That always raises an eyebrow when we're like, well, why is there a discrepancy? So there are a lot of nuances. There are a lot, particularly with multiple charges. Now, we don't see a ton of those. I think courts are pretty good if it's in the same court, pulling them together. But when you have different jurisdictions, it becomes tricky. We don't have a ton of those, but we do have them when they come up. Other questions?
I think we should definitely put that in the parking lot, though, for when we talk about courts, for sure, that we shouldn't have even a few people duplicating things like that.
Yeah, I mean, you could run legislation saying that different courts have to honor if they're in the system and they've been evaluated within the last, I don't know, 3 months, right, or something. I'll let the lawyers argue about the details of that, but we could put that on the table for parking lot when we get to the court process, if that's something the committee wants to talk about. As we get into it. And Tim, you had?
Well, I was just going to point out on that issue and the jurisdictional issues that Chief Harvey talked about. That's the key consideration, is when you do have 2 different jurisdictions, you have 2 different independently elected DAs, and one may choose to go along with the opinion. The other may challenge the opinion, which is their right, and have a hearing, have a court find that the opinion of incompetency was incorrect. So there isn't a good way around that absent some sort of constitutional venue change.
Well, you're talking.
So I don't think we can.
There's a balance, though. I mean, there's a balance in where the first eval, like the opinion of the first evaluator, if it's within a certain time frame, can be honored, and it doesn't prevent the different DAs agreeing or disagreeing. And then the second eval is a different question.
Well, and I'll just add on to this. I'm not talking just about DAs. I know in my conversation with judges, there are judges that aren't willing to accept the rulings of other judges, and they are all independently out there as well. So. It's worth a discussion. I don't say it's not worth a discussion, but it's highly fraught with a lot of legal issues.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking more so on the evaluator side, not even getting to the ruling, that we don't have to do multiple evaluations.
Oh, absolutely, that makes a lot of sense.
And could I?
Sometimes, sorry, just one brief thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes circumstances do change, because I have handled those cases where the initial case didn't show very much signs of incompetency, but maybe there was a little. Then the second arrest happened, and there was clear identification through the affidavit, and the first evaluation might not have been aware of the circumstances and facts in the second affidavit. So there would be times the second evaluation is important, either way.
And for folks in the room that are not familiar, there is a process which people in the court can ask for a second evaluation. That is not done through the department, but there is a process where you don't have to just wholeheartedly take the first recommendation if the lawyers duke it out in court with the judge and ask for a second eval. That is in statute. There is permission for a second evaluation. I don't know how frequently it happens. We don't collect that data, so I don't know where that data lives. But
can I just ask that as these things that are being put into parking lot to come back to at other intercepts, that those of you that are subject matter experts write them on a sticky note for me, so that we make sure we capture the exact language of what needs to be revisited. The Farley Center is on a learning curve with the language. Thank you.
Maybe add your name to that sticky note as well, so we can follow up if we have questions.
Great, thanks, Summer.
Great, thank you. All right, moving forward on to this is tier 2. This is the category of not sick enough to be, that you need to be admitted within 7 days. Still supposed to be admitted within 28 days. We're not even close to that right now. So what you see is what you'll see in the bottom is 3 different day ranges. The blue is ultimately where we need to land, right? Well, for now, I think at some point the time frame might change in the future, but 28 days we're supposed to get someone in. That's really what our goal is. I mean, we can't meet that because of the demand. The difference between the yellow and the red has to do with fine amounts, how much we get fined for this year. For this year, 29 to 56 days, it's $100 a day of a fine to the department. 57 days or more, it's $500 a day to the department. We're paying about 1.3, 1.4 a month in fines because we just are not able to meet this. There's a separate group, there's a small group that meets and talks about where those fines are going to be applied. They're still working through it. The good news is with the plaintiff and the department and the special masters, we're all talking about things that we want to help people with mental health and hopefully will impact this demand prior to the charges or get people out and back into their community with the right services. So it's a good conversation so far. So you'll see the red is growing, and the red is growing for a couple of reasons. One, I mentioned the female, the complex issue we're having with females, but the red's growing. There are two key struggles that we're having. One is the tier one. So we are now prioritizing people, which means if we don't have enough beds, some of the people are going to have to wait a little longer, which is unfortunate. But the 6 people are going first. And the second is we do get court orders from judges who most are just frustrated how long people are waiting, and they basically go through the process of show cause and then potentially contempt of court. And we meet those folks because I don't feel like going to jail. And that's the process. And it does take a lot of time. If we get a contempt and we have to go to court, we have to take lawyer time, our time. So we try to admit those before the court hearing, and that is increasing rapidly because judges saying, well, this is how I get my client in. We're hoping that goes down as the tier system gets kind of rolled out, as it's rolled out, and we can talk to judges more. We're also have beds coming online in December. We have 44 more beds coming online, so we're hoping that helps as well. We have some hospital beds coming online in the next couple of weeks, not many private hospital beds. We'll talk about that later in the recommendations. So, any questions on this wait list before we move forward? Any questions on the phone?
I have a quick question just about the graph that you've got there. Am I correct in analyzing this? If somebody is there for 57 plus days, is one of the ones in red, that individual might be reflected all the way across the board because these are week by week, it looks like?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, restoration admissions process. So there's 2 court orders that we can get. We get inpatient and outpatient. The inpatient is the one we've been talking a lot about. That's a assessed person needs to be triaged for expedited admission due to clinical acuity. That's the tier 1 versus tier 2. We have 2 places where inpatient folks go. They go to SIMHIP or they go to RISE. RISE being a clinical program that's in jail, in 2 jails, Arapahoe and Boulder. They're run by a clinical unit. Security is provided by trained deputies who are trained in mental health. And they're not commingled with the general population. And that was a key sticking point through our consent decree process. And the average length of stay was 166 now. This went down, and we're sort of looking into, there's been some fluctuation recently in length of stay where it varies from month to month by 30, 40, 50 days. And the data just doesn't add up. So we're looking a little into the length of stay, how much it's shifting from month to month. I would say typically though, about 140 days is about right. We have a goal to get down to 120 days. And you heard from last week from Louisiana that theirs is about 120 days, and that's our goals, is to get to 120 days. This frees up, over a course of a year, this frees up a lot of beds. I mean, 30 days frees up a lot of, if you have 300 beds, if you can, on average, free up 30 days for 300 beds, that's a lot more people in a year you could serve. And then there's outpatient, where you need to be bonded out and assigned an outpatient restoration provider based on geographic location. And we're going to talk a lot when we get to the recommendation about outpatient. And we're going to talk about what restoration services, what that term means versus psychiatric care, because there is a difference, and I think that is a huge barrier to judges court ordering for outpatient. I've been told, ignore the August line. We're looking in, we just put this together yesterday, and we want to spend a little time digging into it. But this is pretty much the same table that you all have last time. It just breaks out the numbers. You see the numbers for tier 1. There's 2 groups for tier 1. There's 2765, which is the legal definition of involuntary admitting someone. We could do that before the court order of restoration. Then there's tier 2 who don't meet 2765, but sick enough that we should be admitting them right away when we get that court order. And then tier 2 and community. And you can see community is still a pretty low number as it compares to the other groups. Competency and incompetency is still always typically around 50-50. That's pretty typical. All right, so this is an important slide, I think, for everybody, because we talked about this last time. What you'll see here is I had asked for, back in the fall, we didn't do this by hand, unfortunately, because it's not something we keep updating. We're hoping as our technology gets better, we can do this more regularly. But last fall, I'd asked for a sample, and this sample here is 188 individuals that were in either RISE or SIMHIP that were admitted within a two-month period, and it was 188 individuals, 2 or 3 months, I'm sorry. And I wanted to know the charges versus the acuity level, because our argument has been people who need a hospital should get a hospital bed. People who don't, we should be really trying to push outpatient. But then there's a third group that applies here, people who have really high level charges, who may not be sick enough for a hospital. What about that group? So the top row is the misdemeanors, traffic offenses, and petty offenses. Then you have felony 5s and 6, and I'll let the lawyers get it. If you have questions, feel free to ask the lawyers in the room what these felonies are, but felony 5 and 6 are your lowest felonies. Would the lawyers agree, typically, if you're not in the competency system, are you bonded out typically on a felony 5 and 6?
Yes, depending on history of showing up and other violent things on the felonies, it's always an individual determination. The most egregious or scary of the F5s is going to be stalking, so those people are less likely to be bonded out, but a lot of the property-related F5s, trespasses, stuff like that, yeah, generally, depending on the person.
And also the jurisdiction. If we're talking El Paso County, these people are being held, and which is our largest population of defendants is El Paso County.
The only thing I was going to add is, and also based on your ability to pay. So even if it's a low bond, if you don't have, you know, the $500, then you're still there.
And that's key. You could be offered bonds, but if you don't have the money to pay it, we did have a client that was offered a $100 bond and she couldn't pay it, so she was waiting in jail to be admitted. So that is another thing. And so folks that are not in the legislative world, every year this topic comes up legislation-wise about monetary bonds versus non-monetary bonds. But we're not going to get into that here today, Tim.
Just be aware there's a lot of groups working on that issue and fixing that issue, so we don't need to.
Yeah, great, thank you. And then you have felony 4, and I broke out felony 4 because when we talked earlier about a lot of assaults on officers or other peace officers or others with spitting, and not all assaults are just spitting, but those that are spitting and other behaviors, spitting on a shirt or things like that could fall on the felony 4, and we typically broke that out because there's a hodgepodge of stuff that's falling in felony 4, and you'll hear from Mental Health Colorado next week about what they would like to do as far as some of those offenses, and that's why it's broken up by itself on here, because it's really a mix when we talk about safety. Felony 1, 2, and 3, your highest level felonies, and we felt comfortable categorizing that together as a group. We did not see those folks getting out in the community very much through the competency process. So, and then you have your clinical acuity. We asked our docs to go ahead and review the files of those 188 folks and make an opinion about where they fell on the acuity level. Moderate could lean either way. It's probably more likely low. If people with moderate community acuity in the community are not going to be inpatient. They're just going to need more intensive outpatient services. So you'll see here the group when we talk, and I shaded the blue. You see the blue boxes there. That's the group. So we have, what is that, 18% of our inpatient beds are being filled by people who have a low acuity and a low safety risk for the most part. It's an assumption because we're just looking at charges, but it's pretty low. And Tim's right, some of those are stalking. So when we're able to dig into it, you can see that some of it is some stalking behaviors. But for the most part, the misdemeanors, traffic offenses, petty offenses alone is 12%. So we're filling up, we're keeping people who need beds from getting beds because we have 12% of group that probably could be outpatient. And that's been our argument for the outpatient. And that's the challenge, I think, for this group too, is how do we get those folks into the community and do it. Ben, you have a question?
Yeah, just so I'm reading this correctly. So it looks like, looking at the high column, that totals about 53%.
Yep.
So about 53% of people currently inpatient are appropriately there. And what you're saying is 47% could be out in the community?
Well, I hesitate to say 47 because of those felonies that I don't ever see a court saying you got a felony 1 and because you're not acute. Now, yeah, So right now, the two options are outpatient or the hospital. So they're not. I don't see the judge changing their minds on that.
So then so it's for sure like 12% because it's that first row. Yeah. So 12 to like 47%, give or take.
Yeah, that's what the blue ones is. The majority of the blue ones probably could be outpatient. That's why we highlight them blue. Alexis.
Well, I think to follow up on Ben's point, when you look at that group that's a high security risk but a low to moderate clinical risk, there are other options besides inpatient that could be conducted, say, in the jail they're in now, because their clinical needs are not such that they need inpatient. So there could be other options for that group that are low clinical but high security.
Like what you talked about. Sorry.
Jail-based services without waiting for the transfer and taking up an inpatient resource. But if their clinical needs are low acuity enough, there are quicker and simpler ways of meeting those needs outside of an inpatient setting.
And so you're talking about restoration in the jail that's not RISE?
Could be RISE, could be other types of restoration services. But you're kind of using a sledgehammer to drive a nail for some of those folks.
No, I hear you, and I'm all for RISE. We definitely have an issue with trying to do restoration in the jail setting.
Right. But
there could be other
clinical services that are jail-based, right?
I was just going to add one other comment, and just out of appreciation, this is really helpful because I think this does appropriately scope out kind of the issue that we're dealing with as a subcommittee of, what is the potential opportunity to kind of divert into other resources. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah, this helped a lot in sort of where we need to go and what our goals was going to be and what we're aiming for. So this is, we can keep this in mind, I think, as we go forward. So I think this is critical. Are there questions on the phone about this, Brad? Because this matrix is pretty important in all our decision making. Nothing? Okay. Oh, yeah, thank you.
I'm just wondering, do you see that group as somebody, as individuals who might be able to go into like a supportive housing situation for restoration, or are the kind of the low misdemeanor felony?
The blue group?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're talking about in the fines is supportive housing, what that looks like. There are a number of folks who are homeless, so that's why the courts won't release them and send them to the hospital instead. So that's a challenge. As you all know, in Colorado, housing for all populations is really challenging. So it's no different for this population as well. And we do believe that the courts do order more folks into the inpatient on these lower charges because of their homeless.
This is Derek Harvey again, and I just had a question because we had talked about this at one of the other meetings, clinical acuity versus risk and how that's being assessed out of this group. Because if there are F5s or F6s that potentially have some sort of harm or potential harm to the community, how is that being addressed?
That's where the courts keeping them in inpatient or they're, yeah, I mean, that's why I'm not saying 100% of those in the blue are going to be moved into the community, but a chunk of them could be. So I agree with you. Some of those are still a risk depending on the stalking behaviors. This is a common one. That is addressed by keeping them locked up in either RISE or SIMHEP. Typically, those in the blue boxes right now, we would try to put them in RISE, which is the jail-based non-population mix treatment program. We would tend to try to get them into RISE and have the people with the sicker amount. Actually, not just the blue, anything on the lower moderate acuity, we try to use RISE for. And everybody in the purple's in the hospital. We have a sort of a policy that if you are highly acute, you will be at SIMHEP, not at the RISE program.
I guess that's kind of the reason for my question, because Judge Seamus, when we talked about this initially, and I'm sure Tim may have some additional comments about it, but when you have a judge that's trying to determine diversion to outpatient restoration or community resources as opposed to either RISE or in the jail, I'm not sure they're assessing all those individuals the same way. And so if you don't have the system to say an F4 that's low to moderate clinical acuity is not necessarily a safety risk, how can that be applied in the court and a judge make a decision that, yeah, outpatient is probably appropriate in this instance?
So it still will always be up to the court about the public safety. I'll say when we went through these charges, though, of the 18%, we went through and we actually, because we had a sample, we had to go hand by hand and figure out what the charges were. And I did pull out those, like, they're in here, but as far as our target goal is 10%, increasing outpatient by 10%. We took out stalking. We took out a lot of those felonies that are safety risk. So that's why I'm saying the blue is not 100%. The goal is not to move 100% of that blue. There's some safety components in there. But we feel very comfortable between 10 and 13%. At least their charges were not, did not present safety risk as far as stalking and things like that. Now they might have a history of stuff, but I guess it gets back to me though, is there parity? Like, are these people treated the same as people without mental health based on their charges in court? Or is it because they have mental health, they're still being locked up? I mean, they're going to SimHip, which if you come down to SimHip when we have our meeting, it's a high forensic, secure, limited mobility unit and building. So they're still being locked up. So to me, the question is there parity between those in the competency system and not in the competency system?
And I guess I'll respond, and it's a somewhat. And somewhat in that a lot of times the bond is set and decided before there's any discussion or determination or even a competency is raised, so that issue does not come up. On the other hand, it wasn't until this last year that they took out of the bond considerations the statement that someone who has competency question is a risk for not showing up in court. And that did get removed in 223 because I believe a lot of judges probably still look back and say, well, defense attorney, if you're telling me this person doesn't understand what they're doing in court, how can I feel comfortable that they understand the conditions of bond that I set? The other thing I wanted to mention is when you talk about the ones in the blue, I think there are, based upon things I've been told from folks out in the field, is that there are many of those that at first were tried to get them into restoration treatment that was in the community, but because of an inability to really monitor on bond in a lot of our jurisdictions, those individuals never showed up to their restoration treatment. The judge got sick of it and then ultimately revoked their bond because it's a condition of their bond, placed them back in the jail, and then ordered them to go down to the state hospital. So for those, one of the key things I think is really important is one of the proposals, I think that's in Intercept 1 or Intercept 2, that this organization supports statewide pretrial services, which is something we're working on in a separate area. That helps us monitor those folks and be more comfortable with them in the community when they are on that risk of they may or may not show up to their services.
So let's parking lot pretrial services across the state, and that is a bill, but that has failed previously, but was offered.
And can we pause for, we have
phone?
comments from Judge Seamus.
Yeah, since I guess you're indirectly talking about me, one, I have to emphatically disagree that any judge, or at least this judge, would ever put someone in inpatient just because they don't have a place to live. The issue is completely and totally related to what their capacity is to be safe to themselves and others in the community. And that's really the threshold that, to me, sets the standard. And so, as a functional matter, someone who presents with a competency issue, if that is the concern, is completely treated differently than someone in the general population, because that, or I suppose you can argue that they are treated the same if that same safety concern exists. But that's the thing that's critical, in whether or not those safety needs can be adequately assessed and or addressed so they don't need to be put into custody. And that's what's most frustrating from a judicial perspective, is either we don't have the correct information or the correct resources, because our preference is almost always not to have to send someone to Pueblo, because that just is going to mean a slow, unsatisfying process in terms of being able to move the case along generally.
Thank you, Your Honor. It's working. And
I'm glad you're on the committee and giving your perspective too, because I do think it's important that we give different perspectives on and different experiences. And that's how we're going to get to sort of the right answer on some of these suggestions. And we'll talk a little bit about pretrial supervisions when we get to the recommendations as well.
Robert, one more thing.
Yeah.
Maybe just, and this is, I've noted this as a parking lot, but to Peggy's point earlier, I think it would be helpful at some point to break that matrix out on another dimension, which is like those social factors. So the inability to pay bond, homelessness, because I think those would require a whole different set of strategies.
I don't have that data.
Okay. Maybe we can, I mean, this again, parking lot is maybe we can talk about it at further length, because I do think, you know, if it's an income issue and Tim had said other people are working on this, that requires just a whole different strategy and a different piece of that system that we could handle after January. So, yeah.
Okay. Inpatient bed capacity. We talked about the RISE program. There's 94 in Arapahoe. There's 18 in Boulder. There's 455. It's mixed purpose. Now, I need to explain mixed purpose. It's almost all forensic. There is an adolescent civil unit that's a mixed civil and forensic population. There's a geriatric unit that's, mixed as well. And the rest, and that's 30 and 20, so it's 50 out of the 455 beds are could be mixed civil forensic, but typically the main goal is traditional inpatient hospital care for geriatrics and for adolescent. For the other 400 beds, it is a mix between civil and forensics, but almost all of them had started as forensics if they're civil. So there are folks who the charges get dropped, but they're still really sick and they need to stay at the hospital. There are folks who are not guilty by reason of insanity, and those tend to be really long stays at our hospital as well. And there's charges vary. The ones that stay the longest are you know, murder charges and things like that. Some of those folks are there for a really, really long time. So there's a non-guilty by reason of insanity group, which have a forensic civil mix. They can fall in either. And then, so it's not just restoration patients at the hospital. There's a mix of folks that fall, but restoration takes up most of the hospital. About half of those 455 beds are restoration purpose. And then you have the not guilty by reason of insanity, which we're also working with DLC on moving those folks along that we can, and we've identified several cases for case review, individuals that have their cases reviewed and where they're at. But that's a separate process, but that does free up beds when we do that as well. So I just want to make clear what's in the hospital down in Pueblo. New bed capacity. So I mentioned this already, so I'm just going to go briefly through this. The contract hospitals, we have 2 hospitals that we're working on contracts with, that is Denver Health and Peakview. So we're working with them on individuals that are on that previous table. This group here, that top row on the right-hand side. So people who meet hospital level of care, but they're really low criminal charges, that's the beds that would be used. And what our hope is if they get in right away, get stabilized psychiatrically, they can get back to court pretty quickly. Because a lot of folks who need to be restored, it's the right medication, it's the right psychiatric care. Stabilization will help. More as it's the most critical component. A lot of individuals. So that's what we're hoping those beds will be used for. The restoration and reintegration unit, we're taking an old unit, making it up to code and rolling it out in December. So it's 44 new beds. We're always going to be challenged in Pueblo. We have this unit, and then we have L2, which comes online in October 2020. That's a new unit we're building in Hawkins. And in Pueblo, there's the non-fence side and the fence side, right? And the fence side is the highest secure. It's an electric fence. It's highest secured. It has a perimeter. We have law enforcement officers who do perimeter. The R&R unit is the non-fence side. The L2 unit is the fence side, so it's the high security. So we have 24 beds there. It's my recommendation that's where we stop in Pueblo. It's not a question of Pueblo, it's a question of the workforce. I think we're going to have a really hard time. And I could see Jessica over there who's down there. The workforce is an issue. There's like 3 or 4 hospitals competing for nurses in Pueblo, and the 4 hospitals and competing for nurses in Pueblo. And our hospital is a nurse-run hospital. So it's not a medical hospital, it's a nursing hospital. So it's primarily run by nursing staff. So we're competing with other nursing. So every time we open up more beds, we need more nurses. So this is it. This is my recommendation. Perry's over there, my boss. This is my recommendation for, so this is where we stop. And we need to start building more beds and we are. So as you see, F2 and F3 are restoration beds at Fort Logan here in the Denver metro area. And that's where the future focus needs to go. Denver metro, northern and then northern Colorado. I think we tapped out the workforce market, Pueblo. So. All right, outpatient restoration referrals have gone up. So the great news is that we also have our highest number in August of community-based restoration referrals. So that's good. So we went up. Now, that's as a percentage, it went up as well. But if you remember earlier slides, we went up by a lot for everything. So, but that's good. That's more even, continuing even distribution. You'll see here, though, is our second highest percentage. Our December goal is 35%. So we're at 34% right now. The key is to keep that consistent. You can see a lot of variability and fluctuation in this breakout. This is a percentage of all outpatient restoration. How many all restorations? How many are outpatient? And 33% are. Our goal is 35. Our ultimate goal is going to be between 38 and 42. We think using that prior matrix. We think that's where we'll end up.
Rob, is there a way to get data about from what jurisdictions, or more importantly, percentage, like the percentages by jurisdiction? Like some jurisdiction may be 50%, another one 10, right?
Yeah, we can do that. And somebody else had requested jurisdiction. Peggy had requested some jurisdiction breakdown data as well. So we're going to try to break down by jurisdiction as well. Outpatient restoration services, and this is where the others, Jessica, Callie, and Moses can weigh in. And so we have the contracts, 89% of the states covered. You can see a couple of the counties are not covered for outpatient restorations. Now, this isn't all mental health centers. A lot of the contracts are mental health centers, but we also have other providers that are not mental health centers providing services. And then if Carly would talk a little bit about the Denver pilot program, if you want, that'd be great. So.
Good thing I have Jessica. So our competency case management pilot team is going to be starting here shortly. Our restoration educator will be starting Monday, and this team is going to be composed of the educator and 3 case managers and a pretrial officer designated for this team. And we're basically, the way I'm kind of picturing it in my head is that we have the Bridges program, and that we're also going to have this case management team that is going to be able to provide the ongoing wraparound services that these individuals need on a day-to-day basis to ensure that they move through the competency system. So the way I envision it is that Bridges will likely, they won't have to be involved in Bridges, but they will probably come from there once our full program rolls out. And Bridges will identify these people, identify their needs, and if they have a need for a high enough level of care, we'll put them on this case management team. It'll be about 10 individuals per case manager, which is a very small caseload for anyone who's done case management. And the hope is that they can provide very specific services to this very unique population, because we know that if they don't get those services, they will most likely pick up more charges or cycle in and out of jail. And our goal is to, of course, keep them functioning in the community and providing all of their basic needs for them. I would say probably much like the rest of the state, probably our biggest struggle is the housing piece. I think that housing provides the stability that really is the springboard for progress in the rest of the treatment goals. But we're pretty creative and we'll work on that. But we're looking forward to providing really, really intensive, intentional services to this population. So is there anything else you wanted me to?
The key to the program too is, at least from the state perspective. So we met with the chief judge in Denver and other judges and said, what do you need? Like, what do you need to be comfortable to do more outpatient referrals. And similar to what Judge Seamus was talking about, we asked the question of what you need. Pretrial supervision was key. So the question, it started out as like, okay, we need to be able to supervise these folks. And well, I was like, I don't want to create a new supervision process. There's an existing one in Denver in pretrial. The state is giving pretrial some funds to hire case manager for pretrial who will be trained and take on a mental health caseload for competency. And we're hopeful that that's helpful. That's step one of the project. Step two is it's a package. Is that Carly and her team, the judge knows what psychiatric care along with the restoration the individual is going to get. It's not there's no guessing game. It's sort of a program that has a sort of package scripted base level of psychiatric care. And I think that's the other issue we heard from the judges is that we don't know what type of psychiatric care you're going to get when they go in the community. So they know very clearly when they order someone into this program what the base functioning is. And this has a lot to do with our original model for outpatient was based on a national forensic assertive community treatment. And I erroneously made the assumption that that was the same intensity as the assertive community treatment for the civil side. It's not. It's like hours less a week than the civil side. So the model that we're using, Carly and her team, is we're taking the civil intensity of assertive community treatment and applying to the forensic population.
Yeah, and there's also funding attached for things like transportation and bus tickets and, you know, kind of those nuts and bolts that make everything work. We also transport clients in our personal vehicles. We go out in the community and we'll give them rides to their doctor's appointments, to DHS, wherever it might be. So this will be a very community-based team, and we will not expect these individuals on the team to be coming in for scheduled appointments, right? They likely wouldn't be on this team if that was easy for them. So we will be very much out in the community, engaging them and working very closely with them to move them through the court process.
So that is really helpful to me, just learning sort of exactly what kind of services are going to be included with intensive wraparound. So you've got the educator. You just mentioned some of these other things. What is the amount of therapy that people may be getting? Is there a base level?
Well, so they will be eligible to participate in any services at MHC: psychiatry, therapy, intensive case management, employment, education. We have a day shelter. All of that will be open to them. Without having the paperwork in front of me, numbers just aren't my jam. I don't want to misquote you on the hours, but a caseload of 10 is very, very small and manageable for a case manager. Typically, it's 15 to 21, depending on, you know, what level of services you need. So they will be seeing this case manager multiple times a week.
Yeah, that is, so the contract does talk about multiple case management contacts a week. It also talks about guaranteed psychiatric medication assessment. So there's some guarantees in the contract with some flexibility per client, but there's some baseline guarantees in the contract. Ben?
Yeah, I do comment on this, and I think the first comment is pertinent to the immediate task of getting this plan approved and whatnot. So I appreciate this graph. I also appreciate the progress you made relative to the version that we have on hard copy. I think the one question that I have is that universal coverage is not the same as adequate coverage. And so I just wonder if we can get some data around the number of referrals relative to the staff there, because, you know, it looks right now on this that the gray areas are problematic areas, but I would make the conjecture of like Denver County maybe, or somewhere on the front range may actually be a problem area if you only have 2 staff to handle, I don't know, 1,000 referrals or however, I'm making that number up. So it would be great to see, you know, this graph represented based on referral to staff ratio, just to see where you are on that. And I would actually recommend that that gets baked into your plan. So it's not even just let's provide universal options, but are we staffing it appropriately within that plan? The other thing that I will also say is I also appreciate the information on the pilot program. I think we can maybe table that long term, because I think then the scale is, if that actually is really effective, how do we then scale that across the state and what funding you would actually need and to do that more intensive services. So that's more of a long-term question.
Yeah, Stephanie, did you get the data question? Thank you. Even as you're right, but even as a ratio, it gets tricky based on the acuity of the patient too. That becomes challenging. I don't know if we'll get.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where that's a longer question of you've got a model going on that's basically testing that. And once you learn that, I think there's that possibility of, okay, well, how do you, if it is a best practice, how do you scale for that? And so that's a longer term conversation we do post-January or post the new year. But I think that's just the gap that I see on this is that, you know, this looks great, but then you could have a major blind spot that you don't, that you later, it comes back to bite you. And so just having that demonstrating that line of sight is going to help you in that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'll add, I was conservative when we did a pilot mainly because we didn't have money to do this all at once. And if it were up to me, I would have rolled this out statewide. But we're calling it a pilot because we only had money we're using our federal block grant to do in one area. Denver has the highest number of referrals, so we started there. And then anybody that's asked any money from the legislators, they like to have data, so that's why we're doing a pilot. And
to your point too, I think, you know, you did a smart move of asking the justice system, you know, what do you need? And so if that is, you know, I'm making this assumption, and correct me if I'm wrong, members of the justice system, but if there is just that concern about the appropriate level of care, and then you suddenly demonstrate that, hey, we've got a model that does this, I would imagine that would, you know, build it and they will come type deal. It happens on the outpatient setting, and then you see that quick diversion. So,
and this is going to be critical for the, and I think there's somebody on the phone. This is going to be critical, and I say this all the time, particularly when I was over youth corrections. If we build it in the criminal justice system, we need to build it outside the criminal justice system. Otherwise, we're just creating a pipeline to the criminal justice system. So that's where ACT and the Safety Net Committee really needs to look at ACT and make sure it's adequately funded for folks so they don't have to get charges in order to get this intense level of services. And then there is a question on the phone.
A couple comments. So Laura is in agreement with Ben, but also just wants to add that transportation challenges in reaching services. And then we also have Reina Gonzalez from the Maine Task Force on the line, and she's echoing with transportation and housing as challenges.
Yeah, we've been hearing housing everywhere. And patient and what to do with the fines.
Yeah, and this is Moses Gurr on the phone here, and I would just echo everybody's observations about how we really do need to build this universally to not create that pipeline. But with the mental health centers outside of the pilot program, the contracts for restoration are just that, though once they're in the door, we can always work to get them into other services that may be available. That being said, there are still statewide and nationwide challenges around workforce and parity and things like that that really do get in the way of getting people into those needed services.
Thanks, Moses. Moses, Kelly, Carly, or Jessica, anything else you want to add before we move out of outpatient restoration conversation?
The only thing, this is Jessica, I was just going to add that there's still a discrepancy in the information as far as treatment services are available to a lot of individuals within competency restoration, either inpatient or outpatient, especially for outpatient programming. And individuals still have the option whether or not they're going to engage in that process. So I think knowing what I know with the judges I work in with, a lot of them want more services, but they also want people to do the services that we all recommend and not just be like, well, I feel fine, I'm great, I'll have a good day. And so there becomes this strain where we're doing competency restoration education and there's a glaring need for further treatment and there's no way to enforce that piece.
Yeah, so we're getting back to that conversation again of court-ordered outpatient treatment, the AOT model. I think we sent literature out on that. That is definitely a parking lot topic. That's not something in the department's control. So while the plan could, and let's be clear, the things that are not in the department's control, this committee for the plan can say the department should go explore, right, with key partners. You can say that. You can say, you know, we don't control the court orders, but I think that is something this committee can recommend and talk about and flush out, both by saying that the department should go explore that option with key stakeholders, really all of you. And then we can continue that work even when the plan's done about what would this look like in the state of Colorado? Is this something that Colorado needs? What are the legal ramifications? I imagine after we get this plan done, we're going to spend a couple sessions, meetings on court mandated outpatient treatment because it keeps coming up. So
we have a few more comments on Zoom. I'm going to pause to see if anyone wants to unmute themselves and say them. Otherwise, I'll read them.
Yeah, this is Judge Seamus again.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So as far as just creating the system and if it's created that the judges will use it, to me is not quite complete. In addition, I think there needs to, before you even build it, there needs to be better consultation in advance with the judges so you're actually building something that addresses their concerns. And then the second part of it is also to actively add a component of education for judges so they can be sure that whatever standards are there are going to be enforced. And so if it is, the court does refer someone to that, then that they have some confidence that the services are going to meet what the court's expectations are. The other part, which I think is really important to address too, part of it's an educational component for judges, is what does it mean for an individual to be compliant? Because at different places of health, individual parties who have mental health issues are able to be more or less compliant. And if it's just an all or nothing dynamic, then my sense is the courts aren't engaging realistically with what to expect from an individual party. And to have that education so they can know how to respond when someone isn't compliant with a court-ordered treatment. It can be a spectrum and a range of responses, but right now I don't think most judges have that sensitivity or education to know, well, what is the appropriate sanction? To me, the wrong answer is just to simply, well, they're not compliant and lock them up. And so to try to develop some either resources, education tools to help sensitize the courts is a part of it. And the other part is, to, as I said in advance, to find out what their needs and concerns are, not just to assume that you know.
Thanks, Your Honor. And we did, so you know, for the Denver pilot, it was really largely driven by the chief judge. So we did go to them first before we flushed anything out and asked them. And if we were to expand this, I agree, we'd have to go to each judicial district.
Yeah,
and
because
say what it is.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
I was just going to say that I appreciate it, and I know you have reached out to Denver, but the diversity of the state is so radical. If that's what you're relying on exclusively, my guess is you're not going to be as successful as you can be.
Yeah, we agree. We reach out to Denver for Denver. If this expands, we'd have to meet with each judicial district, the judges in each district. So
happy to help with that.
Great, thanks. All right, so we're going to move forward to the recommendations. And we have, how much time do I have here? I have 20 minutes?
Well, we could do this a couple of ways. We could turn and try to do a little public comment right now to see how much time that takes, and then we won't have to reserve 10 at the end. And then it might just be a little more efficient, or we can just go for it and stop at like in about a half an hour.
I vote to do public comment now, so we know how much time we actually have.
Okay. So I always forget, and I feel bad that I do that. I always forget to say hello to people who join as we're doing introductions at the beginning of the meeting, and I thank you for coming. We always enjoy hearing from you, and I know it's a big time commitment to come and join these meetings. So are there any comments or questions from those of you that have taken the time to be here? I didn't mean to put pressure on you not to talk. If you change your mind, throw something at the back of my head, okay? And we can come back to you. So we have until, we have till 11:30.
Great, thank you.
So.
Okay, the recommendations. There's 17 of them. There are quite a few. Mainly, there's a lot here because this is the crux of the big component of what the department is responsible for and what we're challenged with at the moment. So that's the meat. That's why the meat of the plan really is heavy in this area. Let's start with the first one. Develop comprehensive community-based programs the judicial office will utilize for higher risk, higher need defendants. I feel like we just talked about that. I will say we could probably go
a while, particularly the clinical folks go a while into the what type of clinical services. And I don't want to get too much into that, but I do want you to please share what that is. So either write it on your sticky note while we're talking about what we're missing. Right now, the model is assertive community treatment with support services. It sounds like for transportation in Denver. That's the model in Denver. I know that Dr. Geis and I were talking about psychiatric residential, which does not exist in Colorado for the most part. There are a couple mental health centers that have some beds, but it's like minor. And my counterparts in other states, the commissioners in other states have been on our listserv, have just been ranting about their issue as well, is where we need like residential beds. So these are folks who don't need to be in the hospital, but probably are not ready to live on their own, and should be stepping out of the hospital down into psych residential, or the other way around. Don't quite meet the hospital, but let's not leave it to chance as far as them not having services in the community either, that they need more supportive intensive. Now you can do psych residential staffed, or you can do supportive housing, which has really intensive, I don't know, for lack of a better word, the village model. Carly, is that the right way to kind of describe it?
Kind of. I mean, part of the supportive housing piece typically involves like a case manager on staff. Sometimes there'll even be like a prescriber that comes once a week or once every other week, so that people can get those services, you know, where they live. They don't really have to go and make appointments. Groups can be held there. Restoration education groups can be held there one-on-one. So really kind of look to do the housing first and then build out all the services from that facility.
Is there anybody who doesn't agree with this? I'm gonna make this, anybody who doesn't think that the department shouldn't focus on judicial officer informed, intensive community-based services? I'm gonna look I don't know if anybody on the computer either. So.
And I just want to, as the question is being posed, remind the group not to be afraid to disagree, because that's why we're here. So I know it's a little hard when this question comes from Robert, or it seems to be coming from one person. I tend to let that happen because it's the subject matter expertise in the room around this. So I want to encourage people to speak up, because this is the time to be able to voice those.
I love a good debate.
Ben has a puzzled look on his face, and Lucy's hand went up. So.
Yeah, I don't disagree with it conceptually. I just think it could be sharper in terms of its language, because I do feel like you have a lot going on. So it's not really necessarily developing it. It's just like, well, it is kind of developing it because it is a pilot, but I just think the language could be sharper, and I'm not being solution oriented right now because I'm not giving you suggestions on how that could be. But
there'll be a chance to do that too when you can just sit and think and write, because we'll be putting these out in survey again. So there'll be a chance if there's words that feel different, you can contribute that way too.
Yeah, I guess that would be my only suggestion, is that it could be sharper.
Where I'm jumping to 16 because I do think they relate. Number 16 is support legislation that ensures that all community mental health centers, and I should be fair, when this recommendation was written, not all community mental health centers were signed up. We only have one that's not signed up for service to do restoration right now. So all the other 16-year-olds have contracts in place to do restoration. To me, they tie together, because the challenge for me as a department is what I mentioned earlier about there's no, and Jessica brought up perfectly, there's no guarantee that the other psychiatric care is going to be bundled into, and that they're going to be, the person's going to be compliant, or in some areas of the state that it's available. So I always struggle with, I personally would like to see court-ordered outpatient restoration and psychiatric care as a package, not just for restoration. And I think that's, for me, as a department, where I'm struggling with the outpatient restoration services.
Is that what you mean when you say, if you go back a couple slides? Is that what you mean when you say comprehensive?
Yeah, that's what I mean, yeah.
Then maybe that might be the language that's a little bit more specific, because just looking at a pure systems coverage perspective, I think you're kind of on track to that. So I just feel like that right now, the way it reads, it seems redundant, but if you're thinking it's more like comprehensive in terms of the care package, totally different, would agree with that.
Yep.
Okay, Lucy, and then we're going to go to the phone.
I would just push back on however this is phrased, that Rob, you offered judicially informed. And I will just say that not all judges are as enlightened as Judge Seamus. And so I am concerned by decision making that's driven by the judge's input being a priority over other stakeholders, because I think in some sense this needs to be us educating judges and improving their practice, and less about judges telling us how we should be better at this.
Exactly
I agree
what I was
to-
going to say.
And I agree to an extent, but if the judge doesn't order it because they don't like it, then it's not going to get used. So I do agree that we should be presenting things to judicial officers as the recommended package, but letting them weigh in on whether they would use it or not is important as well.
Then there was someone on the phone. I don't know, Allison, if you want to.
I just wanted to follow up to what that was saying. So maybe the recommendation is that the department has to go out to judges to find out what they want. I don't think that necessarily means that's what the department should offer. I think we want to find out what they want, but we may say what you want is totally unreasonable or isn't trauma-informed or isn't person-centered. I mean, there may be problems with what the judges say, but I think it's reasonable to find out what they want.
So we have two comments. One is from Joy, that there needs to be pre-conviction support and supervision with the opportunity to remain in the community or to the extent of residential treatment environment for treatment along with restoration. And then a comment from Callie that she agrees with the package of treatment and education and would echo what Jessica discussed as a current challenge for outpatient education.
Yeah, I have two.
This is Moses. I would also echo Ben's sort of sentiment around just maybe 1 and 16, just getting a little bit more specific around what is it exactly that we're developing. And to me, it really comes down to a design and a resource question. We can develop the best model in the world, but if we don't have the people to implement it, then what is it good for? So I definitely agree with everybody's direction here around, let's hear what judges want, let's see what's feasible, let's see how we make it workable, but we also need to make sure that whatever we're recommending, it has the resources baked in so that we can get the staff, get the supports out there in the community, as well as making sure that providers have the right administrative and regulatory environment so that they can actually carry it out. If we're developing something that's just impossible for providers to do, mental health centers or otherwise, then I think it can be too pie in the sky, perhaps.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this is Alexis Geis. I had a comment about the number 2 about contracting with private hospitals, and if you go back to that wonderfully helpful data table, most 47%, a good chunk of the folks that are currently at SIMHIP probably don't need that level of care. It's overly restrictive. The average length of stay is 5.5 months for people with low to moderate clinical acuity. So it's really not about reducing the strain on SIMHIP. That really is not members, individuals, problems. It's getting people to the right level of care. And I think the other thing that could be important about that is that, with the community restoration and with using other hospitals or maybe even the residential, we're keeping people closer to their communities and families. And so there's a person-centered piece to not putting people in SIMHIP as opposed to straining SIMHIP. There's another issue that we talked about earlier around having, healthcare, workforce availability and putting all of that in one community in one part of the state when there are, other workforce pools in other parts of the state. So that strain issue can be alleviated by distributing those, even if people need to be in a bed, they don't need to be in a state hospital bed for 5.5 months. So I think sort of, framing that in kind of a person-centered, clinically sound way as opposed to kind of a resource way would maybe be helpful. I think the other thing I'm echoing is Ben and some other people are saying this, that I put this, I think, in the response to the first survey, but I'm glad to know we're going to have another chance to respond. and we can, maybe there's a subgroup that needs to work on this, sort of defining what those restoration services are, you know, and what is a comprehensive restoration service? What is the, you know, clinical treatment piece of that, the psychiatric treatment? What is the education piece of that? And what are the, you know, social and case management pieces of that? So that we know which part of we're talking about it. In the document that was circulated so far, the word restoration services, restoration education, restoration treatment kind of get used interchangeably and in a fairly imprecise way. And I think we need to kind of clean that up together. So.
On my assignment to bring back the details from our pilot program and how that's flushed out. So, Peggy?
My one concern about number 2.
Microphone.
Sorry, I forgot. My one concern about number 2 is that we have so few civil commitment or placements for people even before civil commitment that need to be hospitalized, that if those are in addition to what is already available for people, that would be fine. But if those beds that are available for people now before they get involved in the criminal justice system are converted for restoration, I think that moves people more likely into the criminal justice system because they remain unstable and can't get the help that they need. So that would just be my one cautionary.
And it's a good cautionary, and I should say the special masters are not fans of this. They were reluctant to let us to approve our current 10 beds, so they would like to see how that goes. Mainly for the restoration side, because most folks, most private providers are not, restoration forensics is not their key specialty. So we do train those providers, but I do want to put out here the special masters had reservations about it. They agreed to it largely for the folks that are, where the psychiatric care is the main component more so than the restoration, and they can stay in their local community, as Dr. Geis mentioned. So that's why they agreed to sort of test it outside. I would be remiss if I didn't share that with the committee.
I actually am a fan of this, you know, for some of the reasons I talked about earlier. I think the psychiatric bed capacity issue is very regional in Colorado. There are some areas in the state, like the Front Range, Denver metro area, where there's actually an excess capacity. And so I think there's a lot of, you know, residual mythology about inadequate psychiatric beds. I think for hard to treat and specialized subpopulations, like perhaps this population, there's a scarcity, in not a widespread shortage in many areas. Some of the build up.
Well, I would love to have that information because I think that is a big issue, and I echo Peggy's sentiments that if we don't have a place for people to go before they're involved in the criminal justice system, then we're just sweeping more people into the criminal justice system. I want to add 2 more things. On one, I guess what I would like to see is just a more specific what we're talking about. So I don't think if we should just say comprehensive and then CDHS goes off and determines what they think is comprehensive and appropriate. I would like to see develop a community-based program that includes transportation, intensive case management, you know, those kinds of things. That would make me feel a lot better saying yes to recommendation 1. Right now, it just sounds like, should we look at these issues? Yeah, look at these issues. I want to know exactly what issues you're going to look at so that when I put my stamp of approval on it, it makes sense. And as for number 16, which we seem to be wrapping in, I am a lot less interested in forcing a current organization by statute to have to provide a certain service than I am with saying right now CDHS has to ensure that those occur and you need to contract with people that can provide that service. We see that majority of the time that's from community mental health centers, but if it's from somebody else, then that's fine. I just don't want to, in order to be a community mental health center, you're required to provide this, but you don't really have the appropriate people to do it. And now that's our place in that region. That to me seems like a problem.
Agreed. And I think the key word in number 16 is to ensure that they can provide. So I think we just need to be really careful about that. But Allison, I completely agree with your sentiment that it should be broader than just forcing one kind of provider. I think I'm also starting to hear that we're kind of circling around this idea that there are a lot of exceptions to the rule, and that we have a lot of diverse individuals who got caught up in this problem. And perhaps a lot of these recommendations can be viewed from a lens of just how do we create a full continuum of levels of care, of levels of services, levels of security that can then meet all of those different needs. And that way, Rob, to your earlier point, we're not necessarily investing in just one or the other, but we're sort of really being thoughtful about how do we get equal investments across a full continuum. So that way we have those different options, and judges can then also decide based on the risk, based on the acuity of this individual, based on the individual circumstances, what's the most appropriate ruling that I can make.
Thanks. I actually disagree. I disagree because and this is part of the safety net conversation. I don't think community mental health centers are like any other provider. They're defined in statute where other providers aren't. I think for me, if you're going to be, this is a population that needs to be served by the safety net system because the other providers won't or don't. So who serves them if it's not the safety net provider?
I mean, I think that's up to CDHS. I think it's ultimately your responsibility, CDHS's responsibility, to ensure that there are proper providers. If we choose to use the community mental health centers as the sole safety net system, then this would have to be added. It was not my understanding that we were choosing to use the community mental health centers as the sole safety net provider.
I'm not saying that we are. I'm just saying that in definition, they are today. Like they're the safety net system today. So for me, that is the department's way of providing out community services is by funding those. And most right, they have to be adequately funded and appropriately funded. But I think this is where the safety net committee has to have lots of conversation because maybe take the words community mental health center out of it, but safety net provider should be the group to provide. And if the definitions, the statutes stay and continue to define mental health centers, community mental health centers as safety net providers, then yes. If we change it so that maybe we change this from community mental health center to safety net provider.
I can absolutely live with that because I do agree we have to have one. And yeah. Okay.
And we'll probably have to do some kind of online voting on all this anyway because I don't think we're going to get to answers.
Yeah, that's fine. We're not going to get through 14 more in 15 minutes unless somebody is really, really fast. So yeah, we'll figure out a way to incorporate this. It's going to be a lift for the subcommittee between meetings to get it done on time, but we'll get it done.
Like I said, this is the meat of the department's plan. So this is going to take a little more time. And if we change the sort of we'll have to continue the conversation. I don't think we could just do this offline.
Okay, for the record, I think you just offered us more time. I hope.
We'll have to do another meeting and continue this conversation because this is probably the most critical point for the department's responsibility in the plan for January. Yeah. So with that said, it sounds like we do need more conversation about private hospitals. Any more we want to say on that? We don't have to make a decision today, but any more people want to say on that before we move forward to number 3?
Is there somebody? Oh. Is there somebody that can get information? I don't know if it's you, Alexis, but about sort of what the available beds are for civil mental health that may include restoration.
I can work with some folks on that.
We're also doing, the department's doing a population and needs study that we were required to do for a federal block grant funding that should be done sometime probably end of October. So we can bring that information here. I had that study wrap up, and it gives us a better picture of how things are going. So we can absolutely do that. When we talk civil, let's be clear: there are 2 different types of civil. There's civil where you're getting reimbursed, and there's civil where Medicaid stops paying at so many days, at 16 basically, for a lot of it, not all of it, but. And that's where, when we talk about civil beds, state civil, like our hospital, Fort Logan, takes a lot of those that can't get reimbursed by the private hospitals can't get reimbursed, so they struggle to be sustainable with those clients. And those are a lot of the clients that get asked to be pushed into the state hospital because there's no really funding mechanism to pay for, because they can't self-pay and there's no insurer. That becomes the challenge. And most of that has to do with the clinical presentation requiring a longer stay is a key component. But there are a lot of Medicaid, Dr. Geis would know better than me, but a lot of Medicaid limitations from the federal level about how much they'll pay for inpatient care. So there are two different groups. So there's really the acute, short, intensive treatment inpatient, and there's long-term inpatient. Long-term inpatient is probably more of a struggle as far as available beds because there's no payment source for it other than state general funds. Okay, anything on the computer before we move to 3? Okay. Let's move to 3. Develop a strategy for housing for defendants ordered to competency services and for whom housing is the key barrier to success in the community. We kind of went round and round with housing. I don't think anybody disagrees. Any nuances to housing that folks want to talk about? I know we've been talking in our fines meeting about the fines cap, in a 12-month period, they cap at $10 million. And then they restart over after June 1st, 2020, then we go back to another 10 million cap. So we've been talking to different individuals, including the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, about opportunities to find housing for folks. I know our group is really talking about competency, but there's a larger mental health housing questions out there as well. I would like this committee to give their input, maybe not right now. What does that mean? So remember that the plan is what the department has to do. The department can't create housing. Not that it can't, it just doesn't have the resources. It's not the charge. It's also not the charge Department of Human Services to create housing. We do give vouchers out for housing, but if you talk to anybody that gives out vouchers, that's all great. But where are they going to go to use the voucher? That's the question. Ben?
In concept, I totally affirm this recommendation. I'm just wondering in terms of timing, is it critical that we specify or give greater clarity on this for the immediate approval of the plan, or is this something that we can parking lot long term? I know that there is another task force that has a subcommittee devoted to housing on this that I've been a part of that is actively looking at this. It doesn't come at it from the specific competency lens, but we're still talking about how do you really provide a whole person care model for this that I think we'd be happy to collaborate on. So my question is more around just the level of urgency, because this seems to require, to your point earlier, a whole different system that needs to operate well in concert with a couple different systems. So it merits kind of the January timeframe.
Yeah, and some of the recommendations are going to be looser, right? They're going to be the department must go explore, engage with, continue on the path of addressing housing issues, right? Because this is a long-term plan too. But you're right, with the systems that are not in the department's control, this committee can say, go work with who is in control and sort of best effort kind
Maybe
of things.
just some edits on this, if you want to be more specific about what you're learning with Carly's program. The other thing too is I know the special masters came in and talked about those supporting services models elsewhere. So just to kind of score some points, if you will, about, you're doing this here, you acknowledge that it's best practice across the country. So something about replicating or scaling existing programs as part of your broad long-term strategy, I think that would be the addition that I would say.
Absolutely. This committee can absolutely say if the data from the pilot shows that it's a promising practice, department should go and scale to a larger, knowing that you're not going to get the data by the time January comes. But, yeah.
If I could just, I know we're running short on time, so I won't take up too much time. I agree that if this work is being done somewhere else, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. But my concern is that I don't think we can afford to not address housing. My concern is that a lot of other pieces of this plan are not going to be successful or follow through without a stable housing piece. So if it's being done elsewhere, I don't think we need to repeat, but I don't think that we can put it on hold from someone that worked in the community. It's our biggest struggle.
What can we focus on that CDHS could be responsible for? Well, period.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the question, right? We can be responsible for getting out there. I mean, this committee could recommend to the governor that we go ask for money, right? You could do that as well. But the most the department could do is ask, right? It's not in our control to have the money. So you can also guide the department to ask for those funds or ask require us to work with DOLA, the Division of Housing, to put together a budget request to address housing for X number of or percentage of whatever, something like that.
This has been, maybe you break this up into kind of a short and long-term recommendation related to this. I think in the short term, I think it would be helpful to your early point that, you know, when I asked about that matrix, could you break it out by those, like a social variable in a way? It might be helpful if in the immediate term we develop some sort of framework to or process to assess this or assess clients who are in need of this, so we actually have quantifiable evidence to say, you know, okay, it's really within, you know, it's, I don't know, 33% of all of these individuals are facing the housing need. I think that feels a little bit more concrete and a little bit more immediately actionable to kind of assess the problem in the meantime and get at Carly's point that you just need to address this in tandem with a host of other things, and then have that more longer term thing to say what's the broader system interaction. So, and I'm happy, you know, Stephanie, to wordsmith this in the survey probably coming later. So
great, thank you. Is there other on housing? And I do appreciate the complexity of trying to figure out how we address housing, even though we can't create like housing as a department, or what we can charge as a department with doing to addressing the issue, and how complex that is, given that it's a large systemic issue. Peggy?
So as far as Ben's request for data, do you think Bridges would be able to look at the percentage of people that they're working with that are homeless as a data source potentially?
My concern is that I can't speak for the other Bridges programs in the state, but I believe that they're probably close to us in this respect. We haven't rolled out our full referral process yet. So we're doing it slowly, starting with out of custody, then we'll add in custody to make sure that we're providing the right services to people before we kind of open the floodgates. So my concern is that we actually don't have the full picture of that data yet. We will, but we don't have it.
And again, the charge would be for the department to request a Bridges data on housing, because we don't control Bridges. So
it would actually, go ahead.
Oh, the other just comment I had, and Ben is on this subcommittee with MHD CJS, but they did put a lot of effort and worked with DOLA on some recommendations for supportive housing. And, you know, maybe if they could present what they're trying to work on right now, it might be relevant to this.
Yeah, I would agree. I would think it would be a longer term conversation because it is, I think we're trying to tackle it from a more systems perspective. And so for the immediate sense, I don't know if it's helpful right now. The one thing that I would say from that data perspective, I would actually think that data would come from the judicial system, or because I think my understanding is that the Bridges is you get referred into it. And so you've already identified that housing need, right, or some sort of social instability. So that would not be reflective of the broader population. And so I would think that it's at the immediate interaction with the judicial system that you can really take stock of what is actually the scope of the issue. So that's not within CDH's purview, but I don't know if like the court liaison can even look at this, or you can leverage data that you're seeing there. So that's just a thought.
So let's be clear, as a committee, we can ask the department to request that of somebody that's not in our purview, but as a committee, we can recommend really what you want to the governor, whether it be for legislation or whatnot. There could be other recommendations outside the plan. I know it gets a little frustrating because there's the plan and then there's outside the plan. thought somebody had their hand up before we move over. On the phone?
Just a quick comment about what Ben and Peggy are referencing from MHTCJS's Housing Subcommittee work. On October 10th, all of the subcommittees of that task force are going to be presenting legislation, including the housing one, to the Legislative Oversight Committee. So on October 10th, there will be a finalized recommendation for legislation around housing from this group. So I strongly encourage us to see where we can collaborate on that.
Okay, so we're going to end with this recommendation today. I would like, for the Farley Center, this comes up in every subcommittee, and I'm sure it's going to come up in the task force. I wonder if we can do a mega online presentation to all the committees, not in person. Don't worry, you don't have to find space for all of us. But if we, yeah, but maybe we set up, we invite all the subcommittees as well as the larger task force after October 10th, and we can get somebody to present on that, as well as housing in general. Maybe spend an hour webinar. I know it's going to be tricky with that many people, so we'll have to think about what the right web function would be.
We can get a lot of people on Zoom.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great.
We can do it.
Yeah. I just think about how many vocal people there are and chiming in, so we'll just have to think about what that format looks like.
For like how to get people's comments when there's that many.
I would recommend a webinar and then another meeting for our questions and answers if people have it after what they've reviewed.
Great.
Mm-hmm.
Can you fast forward slides for me, Robert, to the end where it says next steps or something similar? Because we have a few that I want. I have a list, and my list changed even today. So next week, slides and meeting minutes, there'll be a survey for Intercept 4. I know that.
I think we should quickly take a pulse on the room. Do we want to do Intercept 4? It feels like there's a lot more discussion, or do we want to have the discussion?
Well, I was gonna ask. So we had originally posed that subcommittee time would be more focused on recommendations versus context, but this context piece that's coming up feels really rich and important to be able to make strong edits and revisions to the recommendations. We probably won't, even with 2 half-day meetings, have time to do that for every Intercept between now and mid-November. And so I think maybe co-chairs and Farley team should kind of huddle around best way to approach that, but something will probably be coming to you this week. And if not, you can celebrate that not, but we don't have really another meet. We have a meeting September 23rd, which I also wanted to pose. We have a room so that we could have a 3-hour meeting on September 23rd. Is there any opposition to extending? Okay, so maybe we'll shoot for that. That'll give us a little bit more time, and then we can look for other blocks to get through more content through the fall.
Yeah, and I think for the room too, when we get to the court process, the law enforcement, community services, as far as this department's responsibility, it doesn't have a ton of purview in there. So the committee's gonna be a lot of, department will go reach out to recommendations.
Yeah.
And then the committee as a whole we won't have that January deadline to talk more details about those other components that are outside the department's control. So there's that parallel conversation. So there will be more time other than just those half-day meetings to get into, hey, can the court alter this process, or can we ask for legislation to alter that process? That stuff can still happen. That's outside the department's control. That conversation can continue to happen.
So I think if we can huddle around what that might look like in terms of just pacing it out, then we'll have a better sense of timing and getting half-day meetings booked. And
I will ask though that the recommendation 1, 2, 3, and 16 that we do send that out, and for any feedback that wasn't addressed here.
Yeah, just get it. We can get it done. Okay, so there's going to be a survey kind of mania. There's one already open that'll be opened through Tuesday. That's Intercept 3, and then we're going to close it. The other one, Intercept 4, the ones that we did get through, will go out on Monday, and we'll leave it open for a week and close it the following Monday. So then we can come back to it on the 23rd. So that's kind of the survey mechanism. I know it's a lot, but we appreciate the feedback, and we can see it coming in, and it excites us. We get really happy when we see Qualtrics start moving. Ben, did you have a question?
No, I just had a comment, and I was just going to say thank you for this meeting today. I think it was, to your point, really rich. And Robert mentioned this. I do think this is the bulk of what our work is, and so I echo your recommendation that I do think more in-person discussion about this would be valuable. And then we can, I appreciate your kind of logical step through the sequential intercept model. I do think that we're honed in on this as our task. And so with the other ones, I anticipate that, you know, a lot of those will be parking lot discussions too. So, but yeah, I just think today went really well, and just thank you guys for doing this.
Thanks. And thanks for everyone remaining nimble as we sort of change and adapt. Speaking of which, November and December, these set meetings really were conflicting with a lot of holidays. And so we are going to switch them up to, instead of the shift to the 1st and 3rd versus the 2nd and 4th, Mondays in November and December. And then we're going to switch back because it just so happens that we end up not hitting like President's Weekend and MLK Monday if we go back to the original setting. So we're going to kind of ask for your flexibility there through the year. And then I also wanted to see if there was any update, and I apologize, Summer, Robert, Allison, I didn't touch base with you ahead of time. Is there any update on what's happening with the Pueblo visit on the 8th of October?
Yeah, so we have been just thinking through the agenda and so forth. And so if you haven't already, you'll be hearing from Young Shin, who will be kind of collecting some of that information. So we have a sense of who's going to be there in person. We're going to try to set up, transportation to Caravan down there so that we're not all driving separately, so we can kind of use that time. So we are working on the logistics. You can expect to get and hear more about that very soon.
Can we maybe readdress this, given that if we're going to do 2 half days, the driving itself is going to take up a long time. So maybe we delay the trip to Pueblo to after we get the plan done. Does that work? I know Jessica's like, oh man.
No, I mean, I think this is up to the subcommittee for sure. Obviously, I've spent time
Yeah,
here.
I'm just thinking about, it's a 2-hour drive from here. So most of the folks other than Chief Harvey and Jessica will be driving 4 hours that day. And then if we're trying to do a half day on top of that, it's probably going to be a really long day.
Well, we don't have to do a half day on top of the travel. We could do that in a different, when we're back, or.
Yeah, I guess, and the committee can feel free to disagree. I was kind of hoping to get the plan wrapped up so we can move on to the innovative stuff about the larger system. And maybe we can, and that wouldn't require half days.
Right.
But that's up for the group to decide.
Yeah, I mean, do people feel like they would like to see the campus in order to help complete this plan?
I would like to see the campus, but it may have nothing to do with completing this plan. I just like to do it for my own knowledge and information.
Meetings are very complete for a number of people, so I would not drive.
So can we, maybe what we do is we flush out what if we flush out the plan, and then before the plan is the final drafted plan, we go down to Pueblo, and then we can change the plan as needed based on the visit. Does that work? Yeah, I'm really trying to get the most people in person as possible for the half day stuff. So, and then we'll just make sure the visit to Pueblo happens before we submit any final draft of the plan.
Okay.
Does that work for everybody?
So we'll shoot for 3 hours in September. We'll try to find half days in October that work. I'm kind of thinking extending the already existing meetings makes sense, just so that it's already kind of blocked and we have space for some of them that we know we have. So we can talk about that. The other thing, and then I'll let you go, is it was really helpful to engage subcommittee members in some of this context setting, and we would like to do that in even a bigger way if we can. And so we'll be reaching out to you to do that. If there are particular pieces that you want to present that are coming up around different intercepts in the plan, please let us know so that we can tap you to do that. And I think those were all my announcements. Go ahead.
I would like maybe if we, especially when we talk about outpatient, if we can some point talk about what Medicaid can and can't reimburse and what role as a payment system HCPF's control can influence and play a role in sort of outpatient services. I know the inpatient court court ordered care will never be approved by the feds, but when we're talking about outpatient, how can Medicaid play a role in that?
Okay. Go. I think we're good. Thank you.
Hello.
Right now, just real quick.